Hello and welcome. Thank you all for coming along to the third in a series of disaster recovery conversations brought to you by the Victorian Council of Social Service. I'd like to begin today by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land from where I'm presenting, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and I extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. I'd also just like to point out that while my internet has behaved itself beautifully over the last year and enabled me to work from home incredibly effectively and efficiently, in the past week it has decided to play up. If need be, we will swap over to my colleague Brooke, who'll take over from presenting for me today. Hopefully I can stay with you for the rest of the afternoon and we'll just see how we go. Thank you for your patience. I'd also like to acknowledge and thank the Lord Mayor's Charitable Foundation, which has generously provided the funding to allow this conversation and all of the other conversations to take place. Without their generous support, we wouldn't be able to bring you all of this advice, information and lived experience that we're sharing with you. I'd also like to introduce and thank Gabriel Curley and Dave Childs. You'll see them on your screen this afternoon and they're our Auslan interpreters for today. So thank you to both of those. Just a reminder, we are recording today's conversation so you can share it across your networks at a time that suits you and of course pop back and revisit to listen to anything that really takes your interest. So today we're here to take an in-depth look at people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds in the context of disasters. And Victoria is Australia's most culturally diverse state, with almost 1/4 of our population born overseas. Victorians come from over 230 countries, speak over 200 languages and follow more than 120 different faiths. We're home to one of the most culturally diverse societies in the world, and also amongst the fastest growing and diverse states in Australia. We're really looking forward to today's presentations. We've got a combination of live chats with some people who've been able to join us, and we also have a couple of recordings that we're going to share with you. If you've got any questions for us, please submit them in the chat. Our moderator will go through all of the questions and select those to be answered in our Q&A sessions at the end of each presentation, and also our joint Q&A session at the end. So let's get started. Our first speakers today I'm really excited to introduce you to. Sally Carlton and Shirley Wright are both coming to us from New Zealand. Sally has a background in international human security and peace building. After moving to Christchurch, Sally worked at the Canterbury Refugee Council and conducted research into the city's post-earthquake urban regeneration and human rights situation. Sally works at the Citizens Advice Bureau Migrant Connect and is a researcher at Lincoln University. Shirley has more than 20 years' experience working with people from refugees and migrant backgrounds. She's General Manager at Christchurch Resettlement Services, which supports migrants and refugees living in Christchurch to settle by providing a range of professional services that build on strengths to promote their wellbeing and resilience. Sally and Shirley are also both members of the Community Languages Information Network Work Group, which I'm sure we're going to hear a little bit more about. This group was established after the February 2011 earthquakes in recognition of the fact that many of the culturally and linguistically diverse community members were often missing out on critical response and recovery information due to language barriers. So this organisation not only works in the disaster space, but now works toward all communities having equitable access to public information and services and the ability to communicate and participate in society. We're really thrilled and very privileged to have Sally and Shirley here today, and they're going to tell us a little bit about recovery following the earthquakes and the tragic mosque terror attack. Welcome, Sally and Shirley.
Thank you very much, Tēnā koutou. So we are here in Christchurch. It's evening time here. Just to pick up on something you said in your introduction, Bridget, there's more than 1/4 of people in New Zealand born overseas these days. It's 26-point-something%. And as with Victoria, the ethnic diversity is increasing very rapidly as well. So similar context in that respect. As you mentioned, we're part of Cling. So what we're going to do today is very briefly introduce Cling and then talk about how some of these core communities are faring. The reason we want to introduce Cling briefly is because we don't want to say that we're talking from the perspective of these communities. We're talking from the perspective of Cling, which is an organisation that combines people of different service agencies working with these communities. So our current members, we've got a range. Basically, what really seems to enable Cling to work really well is it's a combination of NGOs or international NGOs combined with local and central government groups, and also quite a few health groups as well. And we've had a range of members, past and present, depending on changes in people's jobs and things like that. In terms of context, here in Christchurch, we've had a pretty rough decade of it. As you mentioned at the start, Cling was set up right after the 2011 February earthquake. The one was particularly damaging and also caused 185 deaths. So Cling was set up in response to that, but since then has had the unfortunate experience of witnessing and supporting communities through a number of other disasters. We've had a number of other natural disasters, so-called 1 in 100 year floods, a major earthquake up in Kaye, which is 2.5 hours drive north of here. Christchurch is the nearest urban centre, so quite a lot of support was provided from here up to Kaye. There were fairly substantial fires here in 2017, and the photo in the picture there. You can see the fire in the background as well as the lingering earthquake damage in the foreground. And obviously then in 2019, there was the mosque terror attacks. And then most recently, of course, COVID and the lockdown, which in Victoria you've also experienced as well. So Cling has supported communities through these various disasters to varying degrees, and particularly after the earthquakes and the mosque terror attacks. In 2012, Cling released best practice guidelines that was specifically around communicating with core communities after or in times of disaster. And that was very much a response to the earthquakes and realizing that communities weren't getting the information that they were entitled to. Those best practice guidelines have had a fair bit of traction, and I've just included these slides so you can follow up and click on the links later if you're interested. A fair bit of traction both in New Zealand and internationally as well. And have in fact managed to lead to some fairly significant changes, particularly in terms of the civil defence space here. Civil defence has been fairly active in terms of engaging with culturally and linguistically diverse communities. We can see their publications and particularly emergency messaging for radio that they've really gotten behind. In terms of other impacts over time, things like on the left there, you can see interpreter cards. So I need an interpreter, I speak Tagalog or whatever it may be. Things like that have been increasingly circulated over the past decade, and Christchurch is one of only 2 cities in Australasia, along with Melbourne, in fact, that has its own multicultural strategy. And so Cling is part of the sector that's been kind of campaigning for this sort of thing over the past 10 years. Just earlier this month, we released a revision of the best practice guidelines, and we deliberately have removed the reference to disaster in the title this time around, because one of the big learnings over the past decade is that if you're communicating well for people during times of disaster, that's generally enhanced if you are communicating well with them during times of non-disaster as well. So the better your communication practices during times of normalcy, the better they're going to be during times of disaster. And I'll hand over to Shirley now, who's going to talk us through how core communities are doing over here.
Kia ora koutou, everybody. Thank you for having us along. It's a pleasure to be here as well for us. It's dark outside here, so nighttime. Just a question about how the community is faring. I think there's a whole range of things that have happened as a result of all of these the decade of disasters, and especially in Canterbury. And probably I'd like to lead with the government and how the government has responded to these disasters in terms of providing resourcing and funding and support to communities across New Zealand and especially in Canterbury. So there has been, especially in the last few years, dedicated funding from the central and local government to address the needs of communities to recover from these disasters. So after the earthquakes, it was the Earthquake Support Coordination Service, which was funded by government to provide support to people who were, seeking to repair their homes, damaged homes. And we as an agency received funding to employ people to support people from refugee and migrant backgrounds. So the government started to recognise that actually the pockets of our community that are often hidden or not accessing services. So to get specific funding for that service for this population was very exciting, and a bit of a change really in terms of government practice and policy. The other thing that the government has done was after the mosque attacks, the support, funding and support for the Muslim community in Christchurch, and that's been a really important signal to the Muslim communities that the government and the people of New Zealand care about what happened for them here and helping them recover, and I think giving people hope that they're not alone with this issue, and the whole issue around not just support for individuals and whānau, but also trying to change public opinion or public sentiment or beliefs around diversity. So the outpouring of support from the community itself, the wider New Zealand community itself, has been a really helpful and healing thing for the Muslim community. And there's been some dedicated funding and support for COVID as well. So, I think leading from the top down or the top across has been really helpful for the communities that we work with, because they've been identified. So for Māori, Pacifica people and called communities, been identified as particularly vulnerable communities in terms of the impacts of these disasters. We have an Office of Ethnic Communities in New Zealand, which is a part of a government agency, Department of Internal Affairs. They increased their staffing after the mosque attacks, and the government is creating a new ministry for diversity. We don't know what it's going to be called yet, but those kind of initiatives are really sending signals to called communities that they are important and they are part of this community, and I think that's symbolically that's really important. I think the government's also engaged with communities really well, especially since the mosque attacks, given the number of engagement opportunities that the community here have to talk directly to MPs and the Prime Minister around what they need to recover. So they are leading pretty much what they need to recover. So we have our evidence-based practices, we have our social service provision, but the community themselves are saying, we need this, we need your help to be able to provide this for the communities that we're part of. So I think, that's a really important part of the recovery. And, there's a term called manaakitanga, and that's about caring and supporting one another for well-being. So the focus on manaakitanga has been very, very important, and that connection with Ngāi Tahu, which is our local Māori tribe, in terms of how they've engaged with government and the Muslim communities, especially since the mosque attacks, has been a very special thing to observe. I think community leadership, from the called communities has been a really important part of this as well. So the multicultural councils across New Zealand have been working really hard to help the communities have a voice and recover, and making sure people are engaged in their own recovery. In terms of service provision, we're a service provider, we provide social work and health promotion and a range of other services. Working from a strengths perspective, ensuring that all our staff are culturally competent, having a very diverse workforce. We have 20 ethnicities on staff. I'm in the minority. I'm a Pākehā woman. I'm in the minority here ethnically, which is a great place to be. And having a trauma focus enables recovery. So while people are finding it quite tough, we've had 10 years of disaster, and service providers have also all experienced those the impacts of those disasters. So I think the community, in terms of how they are faring, there's more a sense of wider community, not just pockets of, individual ethnic communities being left out in the cold. There's very much a sense of community engagement and community working together to try and recover as a whole community, and looking at the individual specific needs of specific communities that may be a little bit more marginalised. So I think it's tough for a lot of people, but it's also, there's a lot of hope. I think Christchurch is learning, and there's so many collaborations working really well and really effectively, that I think that is part of the growth and the learning and the maturity that's come out of the disasters. I think the communities themselves, the couple of images you've got there, the one of the Somali woman cooking their meals, I just want to finish on this because this is about who it's about and who's leading. Those Somali women cooked meals for the people on the cordon around the red zone of Christchurch after the earthquakes. And the reason they did that was because they said when they were in the refugee camps, nobody protected them. And we had people coming from all around the world to protect our city and to protect our people. And they were so grateful that they initiated that themselves. The group of men digging liquefaction, they were a group of Afghani men who said they wanted to help and they didn't know how. So we were able to work with them to connect them to people who needed help. So it's about helping the communities facilitate assistance to other people. It's not only their own communities, they really have a willingness and a keenness and desire to help in the recovery of the city that they're living in. The top one is the Plains FM, the community access radio, providing information about civil defence in a lot of different languages. So really exciting things happening from the communities. And in terms of services supporting those initiatives, it costs no money. It's really about time and connecting people to the right people. So I think, there's a double-edged sword. People are faring quite well, but they're also vulnerable and tired. But we're hopeful.
And just to finish up the final picture there, that's the Mosque Victims Support Group that was recently awarded New Zealand Community of the Year, which was pretty exciting for everybody as well. So we're open to some questions now if anyone has any.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Sally. Absolutely. I feel a bit overwhelmed, to tell you the truth. I do have a couple of questions that have come through, and you can just sort of decide between yourselves who might be best placed to answer. One of them is around communications, and with so much information now delivered online, do you see this as an opportunity or a barrier for diverse communities in accessing the information that they really need?
Can I jump in there? Just today, I've had a conversation with Office of Ethnic Communities who are doing some research on digital inclusion for called communities. So there is very much an awareness on the part of government and everybody else that there are people who are left out when information is provided digitally or online, especially with COVID. So Office of Ethnic Communities are leading that research, and it'll be quite groundbreaking research. So, there's an issue being identified, funding's been made available to look into this and look at solutions to it. So, yeah, perfect question for today.
To add my thoughts there too, I think that, so one of the things Cling did was during the COVID lockdown, every week do a scan through of all information that was available in a language other than English about COVID messaging, and most of it was being put out by the health boards or the central government, and all of that you could kind of assume was credible. There was also some information that was being put out by communities themselves, and I think there are both pros and cons to that, because obviously that can sometimes be faster and that can sometimes be in languages that the government may not be translating in, for example, but there's also the risk that some of that information isn't 100% accurate. particularly with something like COVID, which was moving at such a very rapid pace and everything was changing hour to hour to day. But that is one of the benefits of online as well, that it can keep up much faster than other means of publication. And in COVID, that was pretty handy as well. So there are both pros and cons, I think.
Yeah, that's a
And it
terrific
shouldn't-
insight. I think that, you know, the speed of how we can get things online and change them and update them really quickly, you know, does mean that we can keep that news current and relevant, and quickly translated if needed, and access issues then become sort of separate to that. And really interesting too, your comments around sort of credibility and speed with regard to communities spreading information, you know, within their own communities, and for their own communities, and the potential risks of misinformation kind of bleeding into that there. We've had another question around re-traumatisation, and we certainly know from experience here in Victoria with bushfires and more broadly across Australia, I guess, that asylum seekers and refugees in particular that have come from, you know, war-torn countries or countries where there has been significant, you know, conflict or natural disaster or any other sort of level of trauma, and then are coming to a country that they assume is going to be safe, and then they discover isn't, for some other, potentially other reason, or a surprise reason, or a different reason. How do you build sort of trauma-informed responses and that kind of compounding impact of trauma on some of those communities?
So I guess just to go back to the previous question very quickly, just another comment about digital or online information. One of the things around the best practice guidelines is that, you know, information needs to be provided in different ways. We can't assume that there's only one way. So, you know, making that really clear through the best practice guidelines has been, you know, a bit of a strength with that. In terms of trauma, you know, we employ a lot of people from refugee backgrounds, and they and our, you know, refugee background clients have said to us that the earthquakes, for example, were not as traumatising because it was nature. Their experience of trauma, being a refugee, it was man-made. And I think the research, the evidence shows that is, you know, when people are traumatised through man-made means, the trauma is a lot harder to recover from. Whereas the earthquake was, you know, it was an act of God. It was quite a lot of philosophical, sorry, I can't even say the word, philosophical, yeah, honestly, we learnt so much from their philosophy around what had happened. I think with the mosque attacks,
Yes.
very different, a very, very different experience of trauma, because here we have that somebody has done this.
Targeted
specific group. So we need to be very mindful of the causes of, you know, what experience people bring with them into New Zealand, what they bring to us in terms of their experiences and their background, as well as their experiences of trauma, and how they articulate the impact of that trauma on them. Because some people have come through that feeling reasonably strong, whereas other people are very, very traumatised by that event. And I think the other issue is that, you know, the evidence shows that trauma is a very individual experience, that, you know, people's previous experiences have an impact on that as well. So it's, in terms of our work with people, we need to understand their background as well, the background of trauma or no trauma, you know, in terms of their resilience or their ability to kind of make sense of what's happened. So, but very much a focus in New Zealand now around trauma-informed work.
And
Absolutely.
one thing to add to that would be the various people who were supporting the Muslim communities after the mosque attacks, kind of inadvertently re-traumatizing people by doing something that was culturally inappropriate, for example. So men offering to shake women's hands, for example, and that sort of thing that was not intended, but nonetheless had the unintended impact of kind of re-traumatizing people. So one of the things that Kling's very much all about is trying to push cultural competency within organisations, particularly within emergency management organisations, so that when something does happen, if people have at least that little bit of cultural awareness, that lessens the risk that they're going to inadvertently do something.
That's absolutely fantastic, and I know that there's a lot of interest here in Victoria in particular around developing cultural competency within emergency management and more broadly as well. I thought your comments around how the community has all really gathered around the families and communities that were impacted by the terror attacks in particular, but I guess even the earthquakes more broadly is really interesting. And I can certainly reflect, I lived in New York many, many years ago, and when I went back a few years ago following 9/11, I noticed a really distinctly different feel to the city. And I really feel that even though 9/11 was an absolute tragedy, that actually what it did for the communities of New York was to make them stronger and more bound together. And more resilient. So that's a really interesting observation that you've made, and thank you for sharing that. We've run out of time for now, but we will keep you online. We'd love to be able to get some more questions to you later on in the afternoon. Again, thank you so much for sharing. We would love to have you back one day to perhaps explore this in a bit more detail. We haven't given you an awful lot of time today, and it's a very huge and rich experience and insights that you bring. And so thank you very much again for making the time and sharing that with us.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you so much. That was just amazing. Our next speaker is Sue Ingleton from the North East Multicultural Alliance, or NEMA. Sue's interest in multiculturalism began as a child. With her family, whenever her family and she would go to the ports in Sydney to welcome people who were arriving by ship and assist them to make new lives for themselves in Australia. And throughout her life, Sue has volunteered with ethnic communities right across Australia, including Adelaide and in Auckland, New Zealand, Wagga Wagga, and now in Wangaratta. I spoke with Sue last week about NEMA's work with some local cultural groups in emergency planning and preparedness, and how this played out during the 2020 bushfires. We're going to watch that interview now, and then we'll come back. Thank you. Well, welcome everybody. I'm really pleased to introduce Sue Ingleton, who's the president of the North East Multicultural Association, or NEMA. NEMA, which is located in Wangaratta in Victoria's northeast, was established in 2005 as the first ethnic community council in the area. NEMA works to support existing and new migrants, raise cultural awareness and promote the benefits of diversity. And from small beginnings, NEMA has developed into an organisation with a strategic vision for the future and an awareness of the changing nature of multicultural issues. So welcome, Sue. We're really thrilled to have you with us today.
Thank you very much. It's nice to be here.
Great. So tell us a little bit about NEMA and the diversity of the communities that you work with in your region.
Well, as you just said, NEMA started in 2005, where the migrants from post-war Europe were reaching a more mature age, and so the things like the German club, the Austrian club, the Dutch club, the French club were beginning to lose a lot of their members, not only through ill health and old age, but moving to other places to be near their children and grandchildren. And so they got together to make a multicultural group where they could all be represented. So that was in 2005. But of course, over the last 16 or 17 years, multiculturalism in Australia has quite changed, and we now have a much more diverse group of people, including people from Asia and South America, South Africa, and of course Europe as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess with resettlement and settlement encouraged in rural and regional areas, that's really changing the face of our rural and regional areas. What are some
Yeah.
of the challenges that you think some of those communities face, Sue?
So we don't have much direct refugee settlement. We have mainly migrants, and they're a completely diverse group of people. I have done some refugee work, resettlement and settlement in New South Wales, but coming to Wangaratta, it's mostly migrants. They've paid their own way, but it means that they're not eligible for healthcare or Centrelink or free education. There's a whole lot of things that they're not eligible for, which has been a real problem. In that, while they're still working, that's great, but if anything untoward happens, then there's crisis. The other problem is that there might only be one or two families from each language group. So we have a number of language groups. We have 75 language groups in this area, but sometimes there's only one or two families that speak that particular language. So that in itself presents a problem in getting adequate translations, perhaps for the families, and also just for socialisation. They always have to socialise in at least a third language. Mm.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. So how and why did NEMA start working with emergency services and started thinking about emergency planning and preparedness?
So I think it was in 2015. We had a small fire up in the hills in Harriettville, but it actually cut the road so that people on one side of the fire cut couldn't get down to towns, and people couldn't get up to help them. And there was a lot of community resistance to the uniforms. In an emergency, a whole lot of uniformed people turn up, the SES, the CFA, the police, the ambulance, and people were very confused and generally refused to cooperate. Even those who had been here for many years did not recognise the uniforms and the authority of some of these other organisations. So the SES actually approached me and asked what they could do to help. And I realised, or we realised as a board, that it wasn't actually the SES's responsibility it wasn't just their responsibility to be welcoming to multicultural people, but rather it was our responsibility to be able to show that these are our friends, that we need to trust them, and that we need to be able to follow the directions that they give.
Wow, that's amazing. What a fantastic story. And two different sectors, really coming together to work on a common problem, I guess, in your area. So
Yes.
can you tell us a little bit about the emergency planning and preparedness work that you do with your clients and called communities and with the emergency services in your area?
Sure. So when a person comes into the office or is introduced to us for some reason, by whatever method, we try to give them a small welcome pack, but that will include things like how to stay safe in fire, how to prepare your house for winter, how to stay safe in a flood, what to do in any of these emergency situations, preferably in their own language, or at least the language that they're most comfortable with, if we can. So they get the welcome pack. After that, we have English lessons for people whose English is not good, but we also have accent lessons for people who don't understand our Australian accent, because if they've learnt English perhaps at an Indian university or at a Filipino university, they have very either English or American accents, and they don't often understand us. So we do English lessons in 5 different centres throughout our area each week, and usually at some time during the year or every half year, we have the emergency services come to one of these English lessons, and to bring the trucks with their bells and whistles to hear the sirens, that sort of thing. Then we have a Harmony Day celebration, which you probably all know is in March, and we have either a concert or a festival in each of the 5 local government areas that we represent, and the emergency services are very keen to come to that. And again, they give the kids stickers, and they let the kids climb through their trucks and do, well, not during COVID, before COVID, climb through their trucks and all those sorts of things. And then that's in March, and then in September, October, we have Children's Week, and again, we try to involve all the community services in that sort of celebration too. And that's specifically designed for the kids, but of course they have to come with their parents. So 2 years ago, when we had the last one, the fire brigade came with their hoses, and it was quite a hot day. They hosed down all the kids, and they had a great deal of fun, just realising that that these people are our friends, and that it's a lot of fun. But it was also an educational time when we could explain to the parents exactly what the services do, and the parents and the children could get used to seeing all these different uniforms, and that they are legitimate uniforms. They're not pretend, and that if somebody asks you to do something, then they're doing that for a reason. And then we have our cultural advocates, which are placed in most towns throughout the area, and they're people usually of a cultural heritage or who have lived overseas and worked overseas, and they act as kind of a liaison between the two, between people of a multicultural background and our organisation. We can't obviously we don't know everybody specifically personally, but the cultural advocates will know people in their town, and so there's that liaison between them, and they will supply any additional information that might be needed each time they meet.
So, Sue, I'm really interested in the volunteer cultural advocates. How did you go about recruiting them and retaining them?
So originally, 5 years ago, they were actually asked to be to be trained. So it wasn't a volunteer thing in that we let them choose. We actually chose people who were leaders in their community. So they had shown some aptitude for being able to intervene in certain situations, and to be able to approach people and to be a bit of peacemakers sometimes in the individual towns in which they live. Interestingly, many of them are still active after 5 years. They still retain that position within the community. We have had other people added to it, and these have been mainly through our partnership with partners in training and with the local Thay who do community service training, diploma of community service, and we are a placement area for them, so they come and do their practical work with us during their time of study, and many of those have continued to volunteer on a basis where they can work and then come back and just do some work with us when it's needed. We also have a number who are actually called people, culturally and linguistically diverse people, who have a wonderful ability to be able to approach people in supermarkets and in the post office and say, so do you come from Laos or etc., whereas that might not be as culturally appropriate for example, for me to do. So that's also very helpful. So yes, originally they were asked to be involved. After that, some of them have come through training, through professional training, and then just others have taken up the challenge, and we've given them kind of more the same training but on a more personal basis.
I think it's a really interesting model, Sue, and I know that it's something that the emergency management sector has grappled with is, how do we reach people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds? And it was certainly a challenge for the government during the COVID-19 outbreak, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of people really interested to take a closer look at this, so don't be surprised if your phone starts ringing.
Okay.
Terrific. So, can you tell us what happened in January last year with the bushfires.
Yes, so I'm one of the multicultural chaplains with the Victorian Council of Churches Chaplaincy Commission, and actually 4 of our members are also in that chaplaincy program. So on New Year's Eve, we were at the local, amazingly, of a fireworks display and concert when we all got phone calls to say that there really was an emergency and that we were all being sent to different places. So it really did start right on New Year's Day. So while I went to Corryong, which is not actually in our area, but it was very badly affected. It was basically destroyed, Corryong. Some of the others stayed here and initiated the phone trees, so that particularly the people in the Alpine area were able to know where everybody was. Were they on holidays? Were they in their homes? Where were they? And then as the fires progressed, we were able to keep contact with these people via mobile phone usually, although occasionally the mobile phone towers did let us down, but usually we were able to find out where every person was and what they were doing, whether they were evacuating, whether they were staying to fight, whether they had a bunker in their house, because some of our people in the Alpine Shire do have fireproof bunkers under their house, so some people were just bunkering down. We also generally had somebody at the evacuation centre, so that when people were sent down to Wangaratta, there was somebody there that they knew, a familiar face, and even if their English wasn't good, they knew to come to one of us and to say, I'm here. We were able to notify not only the official procedure that they had to go through, but also our cultural advocates to say, yes, they have arrived, they're safely here. The other thing that was amazing to me was the cooperation and the willingness of people in Wangaratta and Benalla and Mansfield who weren't directly affected by the fires, but who were willing to open their homes, so that we were able to very reasonably quickly place people of similar language groups in a house. So, for example, all the Chin people, the Chin Burmese, all went to one particular house. All the Indonesians were able to go to another house. So they had that comfort of being able to talk to each other in their own language. They were able to have appropriate food, and they were able to kind of encourage each other. Then if a problem arose, they were able to contact either the cultural advocate who they knew, or contact the cultural cottage. The cultural cottage where our offices are were open quite extensively. And the good thing was that we knew where most people were, and that they were able to, and we were able to say to the emergency services, there's somebody out in Thuna that needs your help, so can you go over there? And it worked really well. We only had one family of uniform resistance, and they'd only been in Australia for 2 weeks, so we hadn't actually had much of a program with them. So having the people knowing where they were, having people know which language they spoke, having people to receive them, and having somewhere for them to go and to have appropriate food was really helpful and seemed to run very smoothly.
That's amazing. What extraordinary work you and all your volunteers and the community members as well did during that time. I just think it's absolutely amazing. So how are those communities recovering from the bushfires? You know, whether or not they were directly impacted, obviously there's still that broader community impact. How are those cultural communities going?
So in one way, COVID helped. So we had this continual phone conversation between everybody in January. We continued that in February to try and ascertain how they were emotionally, physically, mentally, financially. And then we were into COVID, and so we instigated the same program for COVID, but that also helped us to ask, how are you recovering from the bushfires, and it kind of helped to have somebody personally to talk to. We did find a little bit that when we got together in February, that people were a bit conscious of scaring each other. Oh, this is what happened to me. This is what happened to me. And so there was a little bit of, oh, I didn't realise that could happen. Whereas the one-on-one conversation that was enforced on us during COVID actually has helped, I think. Of course, there's still people who have some financial setbacks, and of course, there's also going to be emotional strain, especially with refugees who needed to evacuate from their own country and then were settled in what they thought was a safe country, and then we had to ask them to evacuate again. The good thing is that they were able to go back to their houses. We actually lost no major property in the bushfires, but it was still a little bit scary. So
Yeah,
they'd
absolutely.
fairly well.
I think that's a really interesting reflection on the one-on-one conversations versus those kind of group conversations or community level conversations, and that's a really interesting reflection that you've given there. What do you think some of the key learnings from I guess both the 2020 bushfires, but as well as COVID, for you yourself, for NEMA, and for the cultural communities that you work with?
I think the one-on-one, as you have just mentioned, is very important, and having it in their own language. So during COVID, we had a very, for example, we have a doctor, a local doctor who speaks Chinese, who would come in on his days off and make phone calls to all the Chinese-speaking community and just ascertain. Obviously, during COVID, that was very scary for them because of the China virus syndrome, and so being a local doctor in the area, he was able to reassure them about our particular area. He was able to stress that they need, what was needed at the time, whether it was lockdown or whether it was just wearing masks or whatever. And that was done in a number of different languages. As I've said, we've got some that's just not possible, that we have to do it in English, but the Filipino, the Italian, the Dutch, some of the Balkan languages, and the Thay language, all those were able to be spoken to in their own language. And I think that was just the fact that we had a list of who was in our area who spoke those languages, and also the skills bank, so that we could call on the doctors or the skilled people who understood the situation in English, and then could then speak to it in their own language without having to call on the interpreters, because obviously the interpreter service was inundated with calls. So while our people are not official interpreters, they are friends that can ring and just give information.
Yeah, absolutely, and that good old-fashioned phone tree,
Yes.
being used from mobile devices.
Yes.
So, what advice would you give to other multicultural organisations that are thinking about being prepared for and responding to emergencies, with the communities that they work with?
I'd really recommend that they talk clearly and precisely with the other emergency services, with the SES, the CFA, the Ambulance Australia, the firefight, the forest fire people, and that was something that we hadn't actually thought of originally, but they are a very important part in the areas where there's bush around. So yeah, and the police have been wonderful. So all these emergency services, just communicate with them, and then try and communicate with your own people in their own language.
So it's really about bringing organisations and people and communities together to work collaboratively and to work cooperatively.
Yes, we sent out emails to everybody, but it just doesn't work. People either don't open them, they don't read them, they think, oh, here's something else again. The phone calls worked much better and got much better response.
So often it's about personal relationships as well, isn't it, Sue?
Yes, because you've got to actually have established a relationship first. If you just ring up and say, how are you going? They'll just say, fine, thank you, and hang up, or, basically. But you've got to be able to say, how are the kids? And, is your goat doing okay, or whatever? So it's a more personal relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think your reflection there about building relationships early is just so important, because that way when a crisis does occur or an emergency happens, you know who to pick up the phone to.
Yes, yes. And you know what their expectations are going to be. Are they going to say, yes, I'm fine, even though, you know, the house is falling down? Or are they going to say, oh, everything's a disaster, when really it's just a little bit of nervousness on their parts?
Absolutely. So what's coming up for NEMA for the rest of the year, Sue?
Well, we're going to continue with our involvement with all the emergency services. We've just had Harmony Day again, and that was very well received, and all the emergency services were really present and really helpful at that. So we try to celebrate as many cultural events as we can. So we've got Filipino Independence Day coming up, and we've got Songkran, which is a festival for Malaysia and Indonesia, and then we've got Cherry Blossom Festival for the Japanese, of which we have quite a few Japanese in this area, which is always a bit of a surprise to people, because we actually grow Japanese tea and package and sell it back to the Japanese from Wangaratta. So that's always an exciting time of year.
How fabulous. And I think it's just so important to celebrate and honour, you know, all of our multicultural communities, and it sounds like you do that in spades.
And of course we have all the usual problems of referring people for domestic violence, immigration problems, all those that we don't actually advertise so much, but which are probably the most important part of our work.
Of course, absolutely, supporting them no matter where they are on their journey, whether they're new arrivals or been here for years. Sue, thank you so much for making the time to join me in this discussion today. It's been really fascinating and I know really useful, and I know our attendees will be really grateful for you sharing in your experience and your insights.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks again, Sue. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Sue. I think what really struck me about that was just the impact and effectiveness of a grassroots organisation. I mean, the breadth of work and the difference that organisation is making in and around Wangaratta, you could just hear is just extraordinary. The other thing I think about the two sessions that we've just heard that has really struck me has been the partnerships and the collaborations that have been developed, you know, really well before an emergency or a disaster hits. And those cross-sector collaborations and partnerships, so partnering with organisations like a TAFE or with an emergency services organisation, you know, government getting together with NGOs and community sector organisations, all working toward, you know, disaster resilience and effective response, relief and recovery. We are going to take a short break. I would encourage you to stand up, stretch your legs, grab a cup of tea or a glass of water, whatever you need, but do come back. We're going to be hearing from a couple more fabulous speakers, including the Deputy Chair of the Victorian Multicultural Commission. So take a short break and we'll see you very soon. Thanks.
Welcome to Life Saving Victoria's Where Are They Now series, bringing you inspiring settlement stories from some of the many multicultural youth that have entered and graduated from our employment and settlement pathway over the last decade. We catch up with them again to find out more about their settlement into Australia and, of course, where are they now?
I was born and raised in Mogadishu, which is the capital city of Somalia.
So I was born in Afghanistan, and due to the civil war, my mum decided to move to Pakistan in a hope of better life.
Yeah, my parents both were born in Sudan, but my mum and dad moved to Ethiopia. We lived in huts, so we lived in a deserted area. Yeah, because you sort of just grow up to sort of learn how to just survive.
And then his way of doing that was, you know, risking his life and coming here on a boat and then sponsoring us to come here and have better childhoods than he did.
Well, I was so young back then, I didn't even know where we were going.
How long did it take you?
23 days.
23 days on a boat.
Yep.
Why did you decide to come to Australia?
Considering that I survived a number of explosions.
You know, witnessing people dying on streets. But every Friday, there are people who drown those pigs in Somalia.
Did that play any sort of part in you wanting to become a lifeguard?
David organized all the courses and all that, and then I became a lifeguard.
But the thing is with me, I'm not really good with beaches or oceans. But I'm surprised that I even did it and I went through the whole course and everything.
Firstly, let me clarify that I was not a good swimmer. I could not swim at all. I met someone from Lifesaving Victoria when I was at language school.
Lifesaving Victoria had this great program where you get to join a surf lifesaving club, but I didn't know how to swim.
When I was becoming the lifeguard in 2016, there was not a lot of African background lifeguards. Now I got into lifeguarding 16, 17 people who are all got jobs.
What else are you doing at the moment? Because I know you're not lifeguarding anymore.
Well, I'm a college athlete in Texas. Yeah, I'm on a full scholarship, so both, I think, half academic and then half sports.
So I work with IAG, which is the largest insurance group in Australia and New Zealand. I also do a lot of community work. I worked with, volunteered with the UN Youth.
I work for Ambulance Victoria as a fast responder, and I like my job. I love my job.
Well, at the moment, I'm working as an engineer, which is, would not have thought of this a few years ago, actually.
I would love to become a business owner one day, because just knowing that I can do something that can impact the world in a better way and make it at least 1% better, then that's definitely something I'm going to do.
Say yes to opportunities. Don't wait.
And I'm glad I live in a country where I can get a lot of opportunities.
You can become anyone. You can do whatever you want, just like I did.
Welcome back, everybody. I hope some of you got to see some of that video from Lifesaving Victoria, some really fantastic stories about people from diverse backgrounds making their way through life in Australia and via Lifesaving Victoria, who have given them some fantastic opportunities and skills, and now, of course, they're giving back in absolute spades. The next speaker we're going to hear from is Ma Paw. Ma is a Karen refugee from Myanmar who arrived in Bendigo in 2016. She's the secretary of the Karen Community Hub and Language School, and she's also a volunteer teacher there. Ma is also a City of Greater Bendigo Intercultural Ambassador, has undertaken a leadership program with Bendigo Community Health Services, has a certificate in Allied Health Assistance, and a diploma in interpreting. She's quite the go-getter. Earlier this year, Ma was named the Bendigo Young Citizen of the Year. We're going to hear from Ma in a short recorded interview with Kaye Graves from the Bendigo Community Health Services. I hope you enjoy this.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Thank you for the opportunity to contribute to the VCOS disaster recovery conversation. Firstly, we'd like to introduce ourselves. Ma Paw.
Hi everyone, my name is Ma Paw. So I'm working for Bendigo Community Services as a community guide, and I have been working with the refugee sentiment and the cultural diversity team.
Great. You arrived from the Mailer camp in October 2016. Is that where you were born?
I was born in Mailer refugee camp. Yeah, so I arrived in Bendigo in October 2016.
And so, where is the Mailer camp, Ma Paw?
Where it's located on Thai-Burma borders.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And obviously, you had to live there because it was unsafe to live in Burma.
Yeah. My parents, the other, yeah, as we have the same experience as other people from my community. I would flee from civil war.
Yeah, yeah. And you've achieved a lot since you have arrived in Bendigo. I'm very proud to say that Marpor was nominated successfully earlier in the year as Young Citizen of the Year for the City of Greater Bendigo.
Yes, it's what our fabulous awarded.
Yes. And you're also one of the 10 cultural diversity ambassadors in our city?
Yes, I was one of them, and I represent Korean community.
Yes. And Bendigo Community Health, we employ 10 staff of refugee lived experience, South Sudanese, Korean and Afghan Hazara backgrounds. And it's very important in the work we do that we work together and we co-design and we really understand what community needs.
Yeah, that's absolutely important for the community.
Yeah. So we're really wanting to talk a little bit today about your experiences of severe weather impacts and some of the work you've been doing with your community here. So in the Mela camp, what is your memory of floods, for instance?
For the floods, yeah, there was rivers flooding. So people who live nearby the rivers, as well as other buildings such as bridges or school and house were destroyed. I mean, those who especially live near to the river.
Okay, so if you live near the river and the river rises after the big rain, you can destroy your house, your school and bridges.
Yeah.
And if in your camp was a little bit further up the mountain, wasn't it?
Yeah, which is surrounded by mountain.
Yeah, so you didn't it didn't actually enter your village, the flood like that? Yes, it did.
Yes, it did.
Okay. So you couldn't, there was no emergency act to warn you of the floods?
Not at all, no.
No. So you couldn't prepare for that? You just had to watch the rain?
Yeah.
And know that something could happen with the river?
Yeah. That's why we watch for the rain, and then if the heavy raining, so it will similarly happen like flooding.
Yes. And so tell me a little bit about how it felt when you first arrived in Bendigo, Australia. That's where you came to, wasn't it, Bendigo?
Yeah, I came straight away to Bendigo.
Yeah. And it's a very new environment, isn't it? Yeah. Very different.
Very different. It's very new environments for me. Yeah.
So if we talk about knowing that the environment is new and, there wasn't such a thing as a Victorian emergency up in the camps, and tell me a little bit about the impact of the Australian fires on our Korean people and the difference.
Yes, as people can see fires on the video, there's a feel because the fire is very fast and it also come along with embark attack and kill people and destroy houses and business. So it's very traumatic. It's very scary.
So it's very traumatic. So for people. So fire in your camp is very different. When you have fire activities in your camp, it's very different to the fast-moving fire you just described in Australia, the ember attack, the loss of houses, loss of business and loss of life. Yeah. So what happens in the camp when there's a fire and what causes that?
So in camp, the fires is caused by cooking. When people didn't look after their cooking, they just left their cooking. So
and so you cook inside the house?
Yeah, inside the house.
And the house is made of
bamboo and leaves.
Yes. So the fire would quickly spread.
Yeah, it can quickly spread.
Yeah, but it's different fire activity. You told me it's different fire activity. You can put the fire out. You might lose your house, your hut, or the next door, but not many, many, many houses and many lives. And there's no ember attack, and there's no fast fire activity like we have in Australia.
Yes, it's different.
Very different, very different. And so when you talk with your community about the Australian fires, what's their reaction?
So they Yeah, it's not the same as the experience. They never experienced like bushfire here before, so it's a very new and a difference. They feel.
Yeah, they've got fear.
They got fear.
And you said they find it traumatic.
Yeah.
So that brings me to, we've talked about flood, we've talked about fire. It's one of the reasons, isn't it, that we decided at Bendigo Community Health we wanted to build a program and co-design with community so they could be educated and they have an opportunity to understand how to plan, how to prepare, and what to do if there's a flood or a fire. Yeah.
Yes.
So this is the second year you've worked in this project. Do you want to describe a little bit about why we needed to translate information when there is some information translated in Karen? But before we go there, I just wanted to reinforce that Karen is a new language to Australia, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because we've really only been intensely settling Karen people of refugee background for about 10 years. Some people came before that, but there's been a lot of other people coming. So in the last 10 years, we've welcomed more than 3,000 people. So when we looked at when you looked at the Karen information that was translated, you said to me it was too complex.
Yeah, it was too complicated. So one thing that we need to know is we must the written must be simple so people can easily understand what they read it. Yeah.
And what were the important points that you and your community, along with our staff, decided that would go into this information?
So these are Vic Emergency app and total fire events sign, and this is the map. So we know we're in, which is another country.
Another country, yes.
Yes, and which is here is very important. So it's fire danger rating. We also teach people if they don't understand or read what's written here, they know the colour, they recognise by the colour.
And Mapo, as part of our summer series this year, we decided we wanted to do some audio visuals in language.
Yeah.
So why is it important to have the written, translated Karen and the audio visual?
Because most of our elder generation can't read so video official, audio visual is very important.
So
they can access.
Yes.
Yeah.
They can't read in their own language, and they don't understand English either. So the spoken word and the audio visual is very important.
Yeah.
Yes. And we decided to make this into a fridge magnet, didn't we?
Yes. So you can hand into the fridge.
Yes. And so part of the education was we wanted to talk and teach a little bit about the Vic Emergency app. Yeah?
Yes.
And for some of the younger people, they do use iPhones and they do have some digital literacy, but older people don't have much at all.
Yeah, not much at all. Yeah.
So the important point to really reinforce is that poor digital literacy, no literacy in their own language for some, and a great fear because they can see on the television the difference in impacts of fire, flood and heat's different in Australia to where they've been born and where they've lived.
Yeah.
So you chose some of the icons to illustrate.
So this is the icon that a warning icon. So people can understand and recognize by the color if they don't know how to read. Don't know how to, what is the written here, but they recognize by the color of the warning sign.
And so it's all very well to produce the fact sheets and the videos, but we really wanted to find a way of spreading the word in language. So you worked with our project staff and the SES and the CFA. Yeah. And you were trained to provide this information. And tell everybody a little bit about the Champions project that's part of this.
Well, we have 16 champions, which is include Korean, Afghan, and South Sudanese. So after they being trained, they back to their family and their friends and the community. So they teach them what they have trained and learned. So yeah, which is incredible and assistance because we're able to reach out more people.
And so you start the sessions by saying who has the emergency app on their phone.
Yeah,
and
they already have, or we help them to download it. Yeah.
And help set the radius about where they live on there.
Yeah.
And so the very important part. So we have evaluated this model again this year, and people did learn, didn't they?
Yeah, they did learn some. Yeah.
So because we've developed a refugee resource hub on our Bendigo Community Health Services website, we've loaded all of this information on, and your Karen communities from other places have been accessing information. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's right. Yeah, like my Karen community from Nell or Horsham or Werribee.
Yeah.
I think also. Is it Southern Australia?
South Australia. Yes,
South Australia.
There's some Korean communities there. Yes, yes. We also produced these in Dari, didn't we? A language spoken by the Hazara Afghan, and some other information in Dinka for the South Sudanese. So that's fire and flood. So that was really important. And then tell me about the heat in the camp. You know, you've experienced very hot days in Bendigo, Australia, haven't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what's the heat like in the Mala camp and on the Thai-Burmese border and in Burma?
It's very different. So Australia is the hotter.
Australia is hotter.
Yeah. Here we teach people and how to look after themselves, especially on extreme hot days. So back in there, we don't have situation like this. We don't have tips how to look after ourselves. So which is very different.
Mm-hmm. So you don't have air conditioners. All the recommendations, with the due respect I say this, but heatwave action plans in English are very different to what you've experienced. There are no shopping centres in Mata Camp. There's no air conditioners. There's no take a shower. There's no swimming pool. So to teach people about the severity of the heat, that heat in Australia kills people. Particularly older people, frail and little ones, people who are sick. So what were the important things that you were able to teach as part of that?
So here we are in this flyer vaccine. You can say cool yourself and keep your house cool. Looking after yourself, cool yourself is very important. Which is what we need to do is drink plenty of water and not reduce and limit outdoor activity. So wear light clothes and then take a shower. Yeah, take shower, cool shower.
So we were able to work with the City of Greater Bendigo, SES, CFA, to really expand the work we did last year, but we'd like to continue expanding that work because the fire activity is very frightening and, we're still having fire. Our Vic Emergency app is still telling us that there's small fires around, even as we speak over the weekend. So what would you like to see happen with, newly arrived communities who don't have a lot of digital literacy or literacy in their own language, and it's a very new environment?
Yeah, we want to continue this project to teach and help them to understand the new environment because it's very important for them to understand, so they will feel secure.
Mm-hmm. And Marpur, part of the project you've been working on for fire, flood and heat health is teaching people how to prepare.
Yeah, also how to prepare, yeah.
Documents.
They include document and passport. The other important stuff, such as food or drink or water.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think if there's one message that we'd like to reinforce is that our people of refugee background arrive with great strengths and are very welcome in our city. They bring a richness to our city that we didn't have before, but we are nervous and worried about them with the impact of severe weather events, and we need to take great care and prioritise in working out ways to help educate them about how to plan, how to observe, how to prepare, and how to avoid being caught up in these dreadful weather events. And we want to allay their fears, which I can see that you were able to do again over this summer period. So I think we might close there. And again, thank you very much for inviting us to this conversation. We are looking forward to continuing this work, and we would really like to have the opportunity to share what we've done and how we've done that with other communities. Thank you.
Thank you.
And another great recording with some great work at the local level, again reflecting those principles of cooperation, of collaboration, collaborating across sectors, and of course working with community. I think what's really interesting about the approach there is the comparison with what people may have experienced in their countries of origin with what they're experiencing now, as a way of sort of teaching and educating them around preparing for the kinds of conditions or risks or hazards that they may face in their new country. So our last but by no means least speaker is Thay from the Victorian Multicultural Commission. Thay arrived in Australia as a refugee from Burma 11 years ago, and he said that his welcome to Australia allowed him to dream big and want to contribute back to the country that made him feel so accepted. And so after contributing through a range of community, counselling and student liaison roles, and exactly 11 years after his arrival in Australia, Thay was appointed by the Victorian Government as Deputy Chair of the Victorian Multicultural Commission. Welcome, Thay.
Thank you very much. I hope you can all hear me. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians upon the land which I'm joining this conversation from, the Wurundjeri people of Kulin Nation, and pay my respect to the elders past, present and emerging, and also pay my respect to any Aboriginal people who are joining this conversation this evening. I want to thank the event organizers and also the fellow speakers this afternoon. It was very interesting, very insightful and very important discussion to be having. For those who don't know me, my name is Thay and I'm the Deputy Chairperson at the Victorian Multicultural Commission. We are an independent body that advocates for and promotes cultural diversity in Victoria across all levels of governments. I'm also a refugee, and I have lived in Australia for, as mentioned, for 11 years. Through my work, both at the Commission and also at the university where I work, at Swinburne University, where I'm the Migrant Programs Coordinator, I've been exposed to many situations where individuals and groups are facing acute period of crisis. In the last year, we all lived through a more chaotic period of crisis, particularly caused by the pandemic, and it impacted our social, economic, personal life, and it was very challenging. Multicultural and multi-faith communities were disappropriately affected by the COVID crisis, and we have worked closely alongside these groups, and they have, as they're trying to overcome the situation or the crisis as it unfolded, from unemployment to food insecurity, racial vilification, family violence, housing instability, lack of access to cultural sensitive services, as well as in-language health advice and appropriate food for quarantined. As the previous speaker mentioned, often, especially those from the culturally and linguistically diverse communities, some of those who come from refugee communities have often been deprived of formal education in their country of origin, and henceforth we cannot take for granted that things we do can address, or people can understand the materials that are translated. Hence the need to work more closely, even more closely, with our community champions to ensure that the materials translated are clear and easy to understand, that can be digested by the communities. There are also groups, as mentioned, from refugees and asylum seekers, and also international groups who really were struggling to find support during this time. They often had to rely on food bank, charities, and in fact, many are still relying on those services, even as our state enters recovery phase. Here at the Victorian Multicultural Commission, we have a statewide connection with multi-faith, multicultural communities. We act as a conduit between them and the government, and also offers our expertise when issues happen on the ground. Our commissioners come from a very diverse cultural and faith backgrounds, and actively engage with communities and groups. This helps build a strong relationship and understanding in terms of the needs of our cold communities in Victoria. Something that is often overlooked when groups and organizations are responding to crisis, in particular as they relate to cold communities and or families, it is the importance of working in partnership, including community organizations, community champions, community connectors, when developing response and programs is critical to a successful outcome. This is because people are already familiar within their communities, and can work and respond efficiently, and also share share perspectives from a different lens in an emergency crisis. As mentioned from the previous speaker, often the situations that we have in Australia might be very different from people's country of origin. Having an understanding of the very specific needs of our people, from providing culturally appropriate food, taking a culturally sensitive approach, having awareness of how religious or faith practices can create barriers or opportunities is fundamental. This knowledge and insiders' understanding is a real advantage in addressing needs and also in mobilizing quickly within communities. Looking at this as an advantage rather than a complication is helpful, as sometimes we might be missing out in harnessing and utilizing those very available skills and knowledge and talents out there. Also, the understanding that not one size fit all for all the communities is very, very important. From a community perspective, being assisted during a crisis by those with your own language or from your own faith group or cultural group gives you provides one that sense of comfort, that sense of safety that can't be overstated. When responding to critical events, taking a whole of community approach, considering the needs of our core communities, help build a stronger sense of trust and cooperation. On a most basic level, crisis create panic. Seeing familiar face, hearing from people in your own language is literally like a lifeline to many in vulnerable groups. And I know this on a very personal level myself, having lived many years in a refugee camp, experiencing chaos, helplessness, and fear. Lastly, I want to touch on the idea of recovery. It's a point that is often missed, but during recovery from a crisis, many people with lived experience find it healing and empowering to be able to be part of that solution and give back. I have known many refugees who might not have a lot of money themselves, find it very rewarding to be able to contribute to a larger cause. For example, during the bushfire crisis here in Victoria, we could see many of the new and emerging communities conduct fundraising in their own capacity. And they were so proud of what they could do in order to give back. But also it gave them that sense of healing, that sense of belonging to something bigger than themselves. So I want to finish off by thanking the organizers for inviting me to be part of this discussion. And I hope that myself and the VMC can engage with you further in the coming years. And also to the audience, I wish you all a very lovely evening.
Thank you so much, Bway, for your wonderful words. I think what was particularly interesting to me and what really struck me about what you've said about communities wanting to give back, and our New Zealand speakers mentioned the same thing, and it's quite humbling to think that, you know, people that are newly arrived in this country and have often come from really difficult backgrounds, and we know that the journey to becoming an Australian isn't always an easy one. You face lots of barriers, from language barriers to getting a job, getting your kids through school, and so on. And the fact that they're, you know, so willing and able to want to give back wherever they can is quite inspiring and humbling at the same time. We're really privileged to have such diverse communities here in Australia, and of course in New Zealand as well. And I think, you know, hearing from Bway, hearing from Ma and our other speakers about their experiences and hearing what they've brought to this conversation, the richness, the experience, the depth, the insight, the ideas, and the innovation has been really inspiring. Unfortunately, we have run out of time for today. I was really hoping that we might be able to get to a Q&A session with our New Zealand speakers and with Bway, but we have run out of time. If I could just thank everybody who's made the time to be part of this conversation. Sally and Shirley from New Zealand for staying up late. Thank you very much for that. For Sue, Kaye, Ma Po and Bway for making the time today to share in their expertise, their experience and their insights into disaster resilience. A big thank you to our Auslan interpreters for help making this event accessible, and thank you again, of course, to Lord Mayor's Charitable Foundation, who have generously provided the funding for these sessions. Thank you all for attending. Please feel free to share the recording throughout your networks. I know that this conversation in particular has been really, really rich, and there's lots to learn for everybody. We look forward to seeing you all at the next VCOS Disaster Recovery Conversation, where we'll be talking about people with a disability and disaster resilience. Yet another really rich conversation. Thank you all again, and good night.